Hi, Karen Fabian here, founder of Bare Bones Yoga, and here we are at video number 2 of my Learn Anatomy Challenge, my 9-part video series covering some key aspects of anatomy. And again, the challenge of it all is really for you to keep an open mind regardless of what you think you know about anatomy, or maybe you're coming at this really as a blank slate hoping to learn anatomy. So whatever place you're coming at this challenge from, I welcome you. So here we are in video number 2, and if you've downloaded, I hope you have, the PDF that goes along with the Learn Anatomy Challenge, which is right on the web page itself, the Learn Anatomy Challenge page. You'll see that step 2 is this. Anatomy is such a big subject. Let's break it down into the critical parts you need to know as a yoga teacher. So to cover that topic, I've made a list, and I can tell you that this is one of the most critical places where teachers get tripped up. In many instances, they go through their 200-hour training. They come out of that training, they start to teach. They quickly realize they didn't remember, they didn't retain, they didn't understand much of the anatomy that was presented in that 200-hour training. So they decide they're going to go off on their own and fill in their learning gaps. So they buy a bunch of books, maybe they take an online course, maybe they go to some training in person, maybe they subscribe to the kind of hours-based training process that is out there in the industry, and they go through those steps and they realize they really still don't, despite all those steps, have a good understanding of anatomy. And what I'm here to tell you is that the reason for that is the approach is very piecemeal. Anatomy is a subject that we can break up into logical parts, but it's really important that the parts be covered, and I don't mean parts of the body here, I'm talking about topics. And it's also important that they be covered and studied in a sequential way. So that's what I'm going to cover for you today. This is a framework, this is a blueprint, a way for you in an organized way to approach the study of anatomy. So the first topic to break up this big subject of anatomy is to understand key anatomical terminology. So these are terms like flexion and extension, lateral flexion of the spine, internal, external rotation, covers things like planes of the body, those kinds of things. The next subject is anatomical position. This refers to what looks like mountain pose, although has one major difference, mainly that the feet are hip width apart, and goes into a lot of a description of what are the qualities of anatomical position and why do we even care as yoga teachers about them, and there's quite a bit there on that. The next thing is key bones. The body has 206 bones. Do you need to know all of them, or are there certain ones you should know more than others? The next one is key joints. Is it necessary for you to understand all the joints in the hand and the foot, or are there more critical joints involved in gross motor movement that are more important for you to know as a yoga teacher? The next one is key muscles. There's probably about 600 muscles in the body. Is it important for you to know every single muscle? Do you need to know the origin, the insertion, the primary action, the secondary action, synergists, antagonists, that kind of thing? Well, there's a way to frame it so that you're focusing again on muscles that are involved in the movements we take on the mat from a kind of big movement perspective. The next thing is to understand muscles and poses. And I hope you can kind of see at this point, we're going in a logical process, meaning it'd be really hard for you to study muscles and poses first before you even understood what anatomical actions are or anatomical position. So there's a very good reason why the muscles and poses show up when they do. And then after that, the next subject to understand is myofascial release. This is a technique where you use a foam roller or a massage ball, and it really focuses on what is fascia, how can you impact fascia with these tools, and why do we even care about fascia when we're looking at the structure of the body? And there's quite a bit out there about fascia now than before. And then the next thing is applying anatomy to teaching. Because let's face it, by this point in our process, if we followed step by step, we've gotten to the point where now we know the details, so now we can get into applying them. This is another area where teachers very routinely fall short, and many times it's not because of them. It's oftentimes because the trainings offered really start here and assume that everybody knows this. And that's oftentimes where confusion comes. It's really hard to go into a workshop where we're talking about the application of anatomy if we don't have a good understanding of the fundamental parts. So when we talk about applying anatomy to teaching, this is where we talk about cues, this is where we talk about answering questions that students have, things like that. Looking at different scenarios in the body and being able to understand why that might be happening and how to alter your cues to help your student. And then the next one is red flags or modifications. So red flags are things we might see that are common compensations that we might want to cue people away from. And then modifications are things that we might offer to help students try the posture in a different way. And those might be modifications we offer regardless of what we know about the student. It just might be an option we offer just to give them another way to approach it. And then the last thing is sequencing. Sequencing is, of course, another way for you to share anatomy. It's basically the way you tell the story of the practice through the sequencing. And so ultimately, understanding anatomy, the way you share that understanding is through the cues and is through the sequencing. So these are all the steps. And let me just take a little sidebar here to say all of these steps essentially are the steps of learning anatomy as contained in my signature program called the Blueprint Learning Program. I just want you to kind of keep that in the back of your mind, but know that these are steps that you can address through any method of learning. It's just that I know that in my program, I lay everything out for you really simply by filling in all of these categories with all the detail you need to know. So I just wanted to mention that. So this is the end of this video, and we're going to move on next to video number 3. So stay tuned.